नमस्कार मित्रों। तो अभी सेकेंड पुलिंग ऑफिसर का हम पढ़ रहे थे, बीच में एक कॉल आ गया जिसकी वजह से हमने इसको नहीं कर पाए, तो बीच में कट गया ये। तो सेकेंड पुलिंग ऑफिसर का है, हमने पढ़ा कि वो इंचार्ज होता है, इंडेलिबल जो इंक होता है उसका इंचार्ज होता है, और वो लेफ्ट हैंड में इंडेक्स फिंगर में उसको लगाएगा इंक को, और नेल से फिंगर के जॉइंट्स की तरफ बढ़ेगा, मतलब ऊपर से नीचे, जैसा कि हम यहाँ दिखा रहे हैं। इस तरीके से लेफ्ट हैंड के इंडेक्स फिंगर पर लगाया गया, ऊपर से नीचे मार्क करेगा। इसके बाद हम आगे बढ़ते हैं। सेकेंड पॉइंट, द सेकेंड पुलिंग ऑफिसर विल ऑल्सो बी इन चार्ज ऑफ रजिस्टर ऑफ वोटर्स इन फॉर्म 17A. He will be responsible for maintaining in that register the proper account of electors whose identity has been established and who vote at the polling station. The serial number and not the name of the elector as given in the marked copy of the electoral roll should be noted in column 2. यहाँ ध्यान देना है कि द सीरियल नंबर एंड नॉट द नेम, सीरियल नंबर नोट करना है, द सीरियल नंबर एंड नॉट नेम ऑफ द इलेक्टर्स एज गिवन इन द मार्क्ड कॉपी ऑफ द इलेक्टोरल रोल शुड बी नोटेड। द सीरियल नंबर, केवल सीरियल नंबर नोट करना है, नाम नहीं नोट करना है, नाम नहीं नोट करना है। The serial number of the elector as given in the marked copy of the electoral roll should be noted in column 2 of the register of voters 17A. तो कॉलम 2 में इसको नोट करना है सीरियल नंबर। He will obtain a signature or thumb impression of each elector in that register before the elector is allowed to vote. The second polling officer will also issue a voter slip. Second polling officer will issue a voter slip to each elector after he entered his electors particulars in register of vote. ठीक है, इसको करने बाद in accordance with the procedure described in chapter 4, it should be ensured that a sufficient time has elapsed after the indelible ink mark was put so that the mark dries up. sufficient time ना, ये ना sufficient time has been elapsed, मतलब इतना समय खर्च कर देना है कि उसमें वो सूख जाए। Electoral leaves the polling station. For this purpose, only after the mark of indelible ink is applied, signature thumb impression may be obtained in the register of voters. If an elector refuses to put his signature or thumb impression on the register of voters, he shall not be permitted to vote, and an entry refuse to vote will be made. If an elector refuses to put his signature or thumb impression on the register of votes, he shall not be permitted to vote. An entry of refuse to vote will be made in the remarks column of the register of votes. The presiding officer will have to sign below such entry. However, if an elector after his electoral roll number has been duly entered in column 2 of the register of voters in form 17A and has put his signature on thereon as required under the sub rule 1 of the rule 49L, decides not to record his vote, a remark to this effect, refuse to vote, left without voting, shall be made against the entry in form 17A by you, and signature or thumb impression of the electors will be obtained against such remark. In such case, it shall not be necessary to make any change in the serial number of the elector of any succeeding elector in column 1 of the register of voters. Okay. अगर रिफ्यूज करता है तो किसी सीरियल नंबर को चेंज करने की ज़रूरत नहीं है। Not to record the vote, decided not to record his vote, remark to this effect, refuse to vote, left without voting shall be made against the, ठीक है, ये रूल 49L के तहत है कि अगर वो साइन इन करने के बाद बोलता है कि नहीं वोट नहीं देंगे तो उसका उसी में रिमार्क लिखना पड़ेगा, और ऐसे केस में सीरियल नंबर वगैरह चेंज करने की ज़रूरत नहीं है। ठीक है, उसके रिमार्क लिख देंगे, फिर अगला सीरियल नंबर आएगा तो उसको हम करेंगे। Register of voters form 17A and has put his signature or thumb impression thereon as required under sub-rule 1 of Rule 49L, decides not to record his vote. A remark to this effect, refused to vote, left without voting, shall be made against the said entry in Form 17A by you, and the signature of thumb impression of the electors shall be obtained against such remark. In such case, it shall not be necessary to make any change in the serial number of the elector or of any succeeding elector in column 1 of the register of voter 17A. ठीक है, यहाँ एक कन्फ्यूजन का पॉइंट हो सकता था। अब थर्ड पोलिंग ऑफिसर की ड्यूटी देखते हैं। थर्ड पोलिंग ऑफिसर विल बी इन चार्ज ऑफ द कंट्रोल यूनिट। थर्ड पोलिंग ऑफिसर क्या है? थर्ड पोलिंग ऑफिसर विल बी इन चार्ज ऑफ कंट्रोल यूनिट, control unit of the voting machine. He will be seated on the same table where the second polling officer sits. He will sit in the same table. He will be seated on the same table where the second polling officer sits. The third polling officer will allow the elector to proceed to the voting compartment only based on the voter slip issued by the second polling officer and strictly in accordance with the serial number indicated in that slip. In the third polling officer will allow the elector to proceed to the voting machine. Third polling officer will allow the elector to proceed to the voting compartment only based on the voter's slip issued by the second polling officer and strictly in accordance with the serial number indicated in that slip. The polling officer in charge of the control unit shall ensure that the mark of the indelible ink is intact on the finger. The polling officer in charge of the control unit shall ensure that mark of the indelible ink is intact on the finger of electors before pressing the ballot button of control unit. He will activate the ballot unit kept in the voting compartment by pressing the ballot button on the control unit as explained in detail in chapter 4. Before allowing the elector to proceed to the voting compartment, he or she will also check and ensure that elector's left hand index finger still bears a clear. Before allowing the electors to proceed to the voting compartment, he will also check and ensure that the elector's left hand index finger still bears a clear indelible ink that mark. If indelible ink mark is found removed, the mark may again be made on the index finger. Where the number of electors assigned to a polling station is small, the duties of the third polling officer can be performed by the presiding officer himself, thus making a further economy in the formation of polling parties. Where the number of electors assigned to a polling station is small, the duties of the third polling officer can be performed by presiding officer himself. Where the number of electors assigned to a polling station is small, the duties of the third polling officer can be performed by the presiding officer himself. This thus making a further economy in the formation of polling parties. इकोनॉमी करते रहिए और यहाँ पर presiding officer का जान जा रहा है. In the event of shortage of polling staff in any district or constituency, then such places the polling party may consist of presiding officer and 2 polling officers as against the 3 polling officers. बताइए, जहाँ सब छोटा है वहाँ presiding officer plus 2 polling officers as against the 3 polling officers in which it is standard form. In that case, the duty of the first polling officer will also include application of indelible ink. Okay, ऐसे केस में first polling officer क्या हो जाएगा, वो ink भी लगाएगा on the finger of the voter after identification of the voter. The second polling officer will ये लिख दो नॉट एप्लीकेबल फॉर दिल्ली इलेक्शन, नॉट एप्लीकेबल फॉर मी, ठीक है ना, हमारे यहाँ। द सेकेंड पोलिंग ऑफिसर विल बी कस्टोडियन ऑफ द कंट्रोल यूनिट also in such cases in addition to his normal duties of making the entries in form 17A register of the voter and making the signature thumb impression of electors therein. It is clarified that in such cases where only 2 polling officers are used, it is not necessary to prepare the voter slip serial number. Instead, the second polling officer will activate the CU and then send the voters inside the voting compartment exactly in the same sequence in which they sign in the register of voters 17A. There will be no need to prepare the voter slip at the polling station in such cases. Okay, ठीक है। Further, in cases where number of polling officers are restricted to 2, the contesting candidates should be informed in writing in advance about this. The duties to be performed by the 2 polling officers should be explained to the candidates. Next point है, in case a voter refused to vote. In case a voter refused to vote or left without voting and the ballot button on the control unit has already been pressed to release voting on the ballot unit, either the presiding officer or polling officer, whoever is in charge of the control unit, should direct the next voter straightway to proceed to the voting compartment to record his vote. Direct the next voter straightway to proceed to the voting compartment to record his vote. ऐसा कर सकते हैं स्टार, नेक्स्ट वोटर चला जाएगा। वेरिफिकेशन वगैरह तो करेंगे ही। Either the presiding officer, third polling officer, whoever in charge, control should direct the next voter straightway to proceed the voting compartment to record his vote. In another eventuality, when the ballot button on the control unit has been pressed to release voting on the ballot unit and the last voter refuses to vote, presiding officer, third polling officer, whoever is in charge of the control unit shall put the power switch in the rear compartment of the control unit to off position and disconnect the VVPAT from the control unit. After disconnecting the ballot unit and VVPAT from the control unit, the power switch should again be put on. Now the busy lamp will go off and close button will become function to close the poll. इस पॉइंट को थोड़ा सा डिस्कस करने की ज़रूरत है, जो मैं समझ पा रहा हूँ, लेकिन थोड़ा डिस्कस करना जरूरी है इस पॉइंट को। In another eventuality, when the ballot button on the control unit has been pressed, ballot button on the control unit, control unit has been pressed to release voting on the ballot unit, and the last voter refuses to vote, वो वोट करने से मना करता है। ऑलरेडी कंट्रोल यूनिट पर वोट देने के लिए ओके कर दिया गया है, अब वो वोट देना है इसके बाद, लेकिन वो वोट देने से मना करता है। द प्रिसाइडिंग ऑफिसर, थर्ड पोलिंग ऑफिसर, whoever is in charge of the control, जो भी कंट्रोल यूनिट का इंचार्ज है, shall put the power switch in the rear compartment of the control unit to off position, तो उसको पावर स्विच को ऑफ कर देगा। एंड डिस्कनेक्ट द वीपैट को डिस्कनेक्ट कर देगा फ्रॉम द कंट्रोल यूनिट। आफ्टर डिस्कनेक्टिंग द बैलेट यूनिट को डिस्कनेक्ट कर दिया जाएगा, एंड वीपैट दोनों को फ्रॉम द कंट्रोल यूनिट। द पावर स्विच शुड अगेन बी पुट ऑन। Now the busy lamp will go off and close button will become functional to close the poll. अब इसको थोड़ा डिस्कस करेंगे। अब इसके आगे हम इसके बाद नेक्स्ट हमारा वीडियो होगा ड्यूटीज़ ऑफ पोलिंग ऑफिसर इन साइमल्टेनियस इलेक्शंस। ठीक है, जहाँ पर साइमल्टेनियस इलेक्शन एक साथ दोनों असेंबली और पार्लियामेंट दोनों होगा, उस केस में क्या करना है। तो इसके लिए हम अलग से वीडियो नहीं बनाएंगे क्योंकि हमारे लिए भी काम का नहीं, इसलिए इसको मैं इतना नहीं पढ़ूँगा। बस इसका एक बार मटेरियल हम यहाँ देख लेते हैं। हाँ, इसको मैं रीड आउट नहीं करूँगा।